Long moves that House Bill number 2609 be taken from the table.
Representative Long.
That is my motion.
All those in favor of the Long motion, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The clerk will report the bill.
House Bill number 2609, an act relating to public safety, the first engrossment.
I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Berg, who will explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, in the early morning hours of February 18th, my community and our law enforcement and emergency management services community suffered a tremendous loss. We were shocked and horrified, and our community will never be the same. I know that what happened to our first responders that day has affected many of us in this chamber. Those of you who have served your community in that capacity or have family members that have, feel a certain kinship with our community and understand our loss. Members, let's be intentional in how we speak to each other and what we speak about today. Our impacted community members, families, city leaders, and most importantly, our fallen heroes deserve the very best of us. With that in mind, this bill does three things. Under current Minnesota statute, the Department of Public Safety is required to submit an annual report to the legislature detailing how it has used funds appropriated for violent crime reduction strategies, which includes the violent crimes enforcement teams at the BCA. This bill establishes that this report must include information about gun trafficking investigations that have been conducted in the previous year. This bill bans binary triggers. Under Minnesota statute, it is illegal to own or operate a trigger activator, which are removable devices that can be added to a semi-automatic firearms to increase their rate of fire. This bill adds to that definition of trigger activators as a binary trigger. A firearm with a binary trigger attached to it fires one round when the trigger is pulled and another as the trigger is released, doubling the gun's rate of fire. It is without a doubt that a binary trigger killed Matthew, Paul, and Adam and injured another officer, Adam. These 3 lives were cut brutally short by a binary trigger. Earlier this week in North Carolina, 4 officers were killed, 4 were injured. I'd like to just read a bit of what was said from people who experienced this in the neighborhood. All of a sudden, it sounded like Vietnam out there. There was a litany of gunfire, just an enormous amount, said a neighbor. You may have heard an officer that was killed in Fargo recently. I would also like to read a bit about that. In July 2023, a lone gunman opened fire on officers responding to a crash in Fargo, North Dakota, fatally shooting Officer Jake Wallen, a Minnesota native, and injuring 2 more before being killed. North Dakota Attorney General Drew Wrigley, a Republican, later confirmed that the gunman had used a rifle equipped with a binary trigger and said that the rifle's increased rate of fire had given officers, quote, no time to reach for their holstered guns before being shot, end quote. While binary triggers are legal in North Dakota, Wrigley called them purposeless and says it caused the officers no time to respond to the ambush that they thought they were facing automatic fire. Quote, he continued, everything you hit twice because you have the binary trigger. That quote is almost identical to what our officers experienced in Burnsville. I would like to note the Sheriff's Association opposes the use or possession of binary triggers. I believe Representative McDonald said earlier, quote, he has a great respect for our sheriffs. I like that. Thank you. Similarly, the Chiefs Association supports the prohibition on a trigger that fires multiple rounds with each trigger pull sequence. That's a binary trigger. Thirdly, it increases penalties for straw purchases. In current statute, it is illegal to purchase a pistol or semi-automatic military-style assault weapon and give it to someone who is prohibited from possessing firearms. It also states that straw purchasing is illegal if the buyer knew that the transferee was a prohibited person, and the penalty is a gross misdemeanor. This language makes it difficult for a prosecutor to secure a conviction. So this bill adds, or reasonably should have known, to the prosecutor's burden of proof, which will make it easier to convict straw purchasers. It also raises the penalty to a felony, punishable by up to 2 years in prison and or a $10,000 fine, with an aggregated penalty of up to 5 years in prison and or a $20,000 fine if the transferee uses the weapon in a crime of violence within a year of the transfer. Lastly, it extends the prohibition on straw purchasing to all firearms, with the exception for non-semi-automatic military assault weapons, long guns transferred to an eligible minor, such as rifles and shotguns used for hunting and guns used in sport shooting, for example, trap shooting. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Novotny moves to amend House File Number 2609, the first engrossment. The amendment is coded DE2.
The member from Sherburne, Representative Novotny.
Madam Speaker, DE2 removes 5 words from this bill. My amendment leaves in the reporting and it leaves in the straw purchase. It takes out the language referencing to the trigger. Now, I've heard some things said across the aisle here that I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to dispute, but we're gonna, this is a hard one, guys. This is gonna be a hard one to get through, okay? It's gonna be hard to get through because it's just so frustrating, and you know it is frustrating. Madam Speaker, we've got the amendment to my amendment. Can we do that?
There is an amendment to the amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Whitty moves to amend the Novotny amendment to House File Number 2609, the first engrossment. The amendment to the amendment is coded A5.
The member from Dakota, Representative Whitty.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, members. We saw in February what happened when straw buyers give guns to prohibited persons. We have seen, and I've talked about it numerous times, the assaults on our police officers in our communities. They're under attack. They need our support, and not just days on the incidents, and not just days of the funeral, but 365. According to the BCA Uniform Crime Report, in 2019, 467 officers were assaulted. In 2021, that jumped to 1,112. This is a 140% increase over a 3-year time frame. This violent trend toward officers is very troubling. I was in my room that day of the incident, and I started receiving text messages at 6 a.m. of the horrific things that were happening in Burnsville. And one of the text messages said, worst case scenario. I later heard the voices of officers I worked with that day. That night, I went to the vigil. I stood back with my alumni and paid my respects. We had our elected officials that went to the press conference, were told not to be there, walked up after they were finished and started speaking, but did not speak to the police chief, the fire chief, or anyone in that area. That's showing up, but that's not supporting them. We lost 2 Burnsville officers and 1 Burnsville paramedic firefighter. First time in Minnesota history we've ever lost a paramedic or a firefighter. First time in Minnesota history we lost a hostage crisis negotiator. For 18 years of my career, I led that team. One of my former members of that team is now the team lead, and he watched 2 of his officers died, and he got shot at, and the paramedic that tried to rescue him in an armored vehicle got shot. This bill includes an increased penalty on a straw buyer of up to 5 years in prison and up to $20,000 fine if the prohibited person, they transfer the firearm to use it in a crime of violence. My amendment adds an increase in the penalty on a straw buyer of up to 10 years in prison and or up to $40,000 in fine if the prohibited person uses a firearm to assault the public safety officer. The public safety officers included police officers, but also included a firefighter, EMT, who rushed in to help 2 fallen officers. Instead of demonizing the men and women who keep us safe every day, we should be ensuring that the straw buyers who enable them to be assaulted or killed face the consequences of actions. Today, I ask for your support one of the days in the 365, and I ask for a roll call, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Representative Whitty requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion to the amendment. Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Whitty, for bringing this amendment. And we understand the incredible pain that you experienced that horrible day. And I will say that I am disappointed that this amendment to the amendment is on the part of the underlying amendment that strips the binary trigger from the bill. I really wish you had done this one as a separate one to the actual language of the bill. And the reason why is because the binary trigger is such an important aspect of this bill. You know, I personally didn't know what a binary trigger was until I read the indictment from the Burnsville shooting, and I'm just going to read that paragraph from you. It says, or for you, it says, among the firearms that the defendant bought and transferred at the shooter's request were 3 semi-automatic AR-15 style rifle lower receivers. One of these semi-automatic firearm lower receivers was a Franklin Armory, describes the gun, caliber semi-automatic rifle that was equipped with a binary trigger. A firearm with a binary trigger fires one shot when the trigger is pulled and another when the trigger is released, effectively doubling the rate of fire. So the binary trigger language is very important to the bill, and I really, like I said, wish your underlying amendment was to the actual bill itself and not to the part that's stripping the binary trigger from that. You know, and we have done things over the years. We've increased penalties substantially in the assault in the first degree section of our statutes for great bodily harm and using a dangerous weapon against a peace officer. That change was made in 2021 after Eric Mortensen was injured. So, you know, we have been increasing penalties and doing those things. It's not enough. Frankly, we need to do more. And one of those things more that we can do is eliminate binary triggers. Not just Burnsville, like Representative Berg said, in Fargo, it was used. There's no purpose for them. And so again, it's just too bad that this underlying amendment was attached to that piece of the bill. I'm going to vote for your underlying amendment, or for the amendment to the amendment, and just encourage members to vote how they want on that. But again, disappointed that it's attached to the underlying amendment stripping the binary trigger. Thank you.
Discussion on the Whitty amendment. Further discussion. Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. Will the clerk please call the names of the members who are voting remotely once the people who are calling them look ready?
Carroll. Howard.
Aye.
Howard, aye. Keel.
Keel, aye.
Keel, aye. Cagle.
Cagle, aye.
Cagle, aye. Tabke.
Tabke, aye.
Tabke, aye. Carroll.
Carroll, aye.
Carroll, aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 113 ayes and 19 nays, the amendment to the amendment is adopted. We are on the underlying Novotny amendment. Discussion to the amendment. Representative Novotny.
Speaker, I was hoping you'd leave that board up. Thank you for taking it down, because even on a bill that you know you're going to, in a couple of minutes, vote down, an amendment you're going to vote down in a couple minutes, there were still people that couldn't vote green on supporting law enforcement officers, increasing the penalties for public safety officers. On a bill you know you're going to regret, an amendment you know you're going to reject, you couldn't even vote green. Thank you for taking it down. In the packet passed out about 12 hours ago, there was a letter from the Sheriff's Association and National Shooting Sports. On the back of that packet is a clipping from a newspaper. And I pulled that out because I was cleaning my office as we prepare to go to the palace for politicians rebuild. And I found a thing that my family put together when I retired, and it's a story about, we did a jump out on some bank robbers in Big Lake, and it's hard to tell, it's a little grainy picture, but hanging from my neck is a Colt SMG. The Colt SMG was a lower from an M16 that they'd taken out. They modified it to fire 9mm at a subcompact machine gun. And I just thought it was so important to note because I had a feeling what the narrative would be tonight, and I guessed it right. The trigger went out and caused the problems. And I say that because that gun hanging around my neck had a fully automatic trigger option. And I won't, in reference to the last bill, which I forgot to bring up, that was in my squad for probably 15 years. Every night, it was there. Every morning I came out, or whatever shift I was on, and it was squad ready, which means it had a magazine in it, but it was unloaded. And the point I want to make now is, whenever I did start my shift and I went out, my SMG was there. It hadn't magically gone off and committed any crimes. You know who killed these 3 brave men? The guy whose name I won't say. He killed those 3 men. It wasn't a trigger that may have allowed him to shoot a little quicker. Anybody that can, yes, thank you for printing that off. This is something I will frame. Anybody that's done any amount of shooting knows that the difference between a binary trigger and a semi-automatic trigger is not that fast. And also, if you're running a 30-round magazine, you'll get done that much faster. When people ask me about politics and what is so frustrating, I point to this bill. I point to this bill, and I will be able to point to this bill for the rest of my life. What is wrong with politics? This bill is the perfect example of it. This bill was passed off this floor with bipartisan support last year. Politely got off the floor so you didn't have to take a bad vote. And then it was dropped to committee. And then that Sunday morning, I went to church and I sat in the back and I cried because I thought, what could I have done different? What could I have done different? I didn't know the facts. Should I have fought more when we were doing all this crime fixing after George Floyd? Did I fight him enough? Was I too polite? Did I not yell? Should I get on my desk and said, this doesn't work? I'm pretty sure I've said this doesn't work. Maybe I should have said it loud enough. We come to the floor when it's all done with the funerals, and I come to the floor and we try to pull this back up, and you blocked it. The same people that voted off to the floor, all green, you blocked it because you had a fix. You had a fix. You had to blame it on something else. You had to blame it on an inanimate object. You didn't want to blame it on the guy whose name I won't say. I won't question your motive. I did some research, as Representative Hurt recommended I do, And I saw pure theater. What we did that day when we tried to do the emergency was pure theater. It was sleight of hand. Don't pay attention to what we didn't do. Let's come and blame this inanimate object. I don't know what more I can say. We need to look forward, and what are we going to do different? Are we going to start looking at victims? Are we going to start holding people responsible? I talked about it on Monday. We can talk about semi-automatics and triggers. Okay? This binary trigger, if you make it a semi-automatic, if you make it full auto and you consider it a full auto, it'll have the same classification as the switches that they're using on these pistols. And they're getting nothing for it. They're getting a day. My problem is I forget stuff, and I forgive and I forget. So I wrote it down. And I won't call a certain member out, but she's like, hey, we charge people. They get convictions. You get a one-day conviction? That's your sentence for having a submachine gun? You're dumping rounds? A guy that was already not supposed to be possessing a firearm to start with gets caught with a switch, and he gets 1 day? And then you say that's a conviction, so it's all good? I'll tell the story again. When this first started, when the previous Hennepin County attorney was there, I did a data request to find out just how many firearm possession cases were being prosecuted and charged. And it took forever to get it back. And then I found out why. Because they went and charged everybody out. Do a quick long-form complaint, then dismiss it. Then we can claim that we charged everybody out. And with a straight face, people will say, hey, look, we charged them out. We got a conviction. You want to talk about pure theater? That's pure theater. You want to make a difference? Let's start making a difference. Let's start punishing criminals. Let's not drop the minimums that already aren't being enforced. Why don't we try something else? I'll close with a little story. We used to do, you're mandated to do inclement weather and nighttime shooting as part of your annual qualifications. And for the case of simplicity, we would do the inclement weather night shoot at once. And we'd schedule it usually in November. Nice to have a little snow on the ground, make them cold. And one of the drills that I would make them do to see if they were familiar with their firearms would have them take an empty pistol, field strip it, put it back together, and fire one round. And there was one deputy who would always take his 1 month. At that time, you would get a box of ammo every month. And he never missed his box of ammo. And I'd seen him shoot, and this had gone on for years. I don't know what he did with his ammo because he obviously wasn't practicing with it. And we get to the part where his hands are cold, and I ask him in the dark to take the gun apart and put it back together. And he couldn't. And I tried to tell him the right way to do it. And he said, well, that's not the way I do it a different way. And after the longest time, and after his fingers got colder and colder, and it got harder for him to do, I finally said, your way sucks. Try it my way. We're coming up to the end of my 5th session here. The bar has gotten lower and lower and lower every year. and it doesn't work. The way that we've been doing sucks. You're not doing your people any favors. You're not doing the people committing the crimes any favors by letting them off. You let a person that's already got a felony conviction, is prohibited from having firearms, he's caught with a switch to make it a federal firearm violation, and he knows if he goes federal, it's going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight, right? He's got a lot to lose if he goes federal. If he goes federal. He gets arrested for the second or the fifth or the 10th time, and he gets no penalty. So what's to stop him from the 6th or the 10th or the 16th? There's no reason for him not to. Let's think about raising the bar. Let's not lower the bar. Back to the amendment. Thank you for not interrupting me. Bring the bill separate. Honor the vote that you took last year. Let's put some publicity into this. Let's let people know that they shouldn't be providing firearms because we're going to take it serious and they're going to go to jail and there'll be consequences. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your understanding and silence. Please vote green, and I request a roll call.
Representative Novotny requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion to the amendment as amended. Representative Berg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before I give a response and give you the reason why we need this legislation, I want us to acknowledge the very real emotion, hurt, pain, loss that I can see in Representative Whitty and Representative Novotny. We can hold these two truths, that we hurt and that we have options to do something to keep our first responders and our community safe. So binary triggers serve no other purpose than to deliver more rounds on a target than a standard trigger. It's impractical at best for any type of hunting. In fact, binary triggers make a platform less accurate. I also want to note that 10 other states already ban binary triggers, including Florida and Idaho. Pretty red states, right? But they recognize that they serve no practical purpose other than to tear down a target. And that's what they did in Burnsville, in Fargo, and probably other places we don't even know about. So I just want to say it again. It was because of an AR-15 style rifle that was modified with an aftermarket binary trigger that 3 lives were brutally cut short. So let's support our officers and our firefighter paramedics and do what we can to keep them safe, which is what this bill does. Please vote no.
Discussion. The member from Sherburne, Representative Novotny.
Hey, just to be clear, we're voting on my DE2 amendment.
That's right, as amended.
I think I made myself clear and request a green vote.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Will the clerk please call the names of the members voting remotely?
Carroll. Howard.
Howard, no.
Howard, no. Keel.
Aye.
Keel, aye. Cagle.
Cagle, no.
Cagle, no. Tabke.
Tabke, no.
Tabke, no. Carroll.
Carroll, no.
Carroll, no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 65 ayes and 67 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 2609.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. The member from Hennepin, Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members. We started this week with three gun bills, and we're on the last one. And I could have delivered this on any one of them. You know, all of these bills, they had one goal, maybe two, and the goal was to restrict access. And cause law-abiding gun owners to become criminals if they didn't meet with a new set of criteria for storage, for reporting stolen guns. All three of these are model language. And when we look at model language, I think we have to be super thoughtful. We have to be and we have to temper what we do with model language. And the proponents of these particular bills are always claiming and have this perception that violent crime is being fueled by firearms. And I don't think that's true. I think violent crime is fueled by hopelessness and anger, and that firearms are one of those tools. And access to firearms are one component of how society is dealing with that anger and hopelessness. It's combined with disorders of conduct, substance abuse, impulse control disorders, socioeconomic disadvantages, community violence, violent behavior tendencies, and the list goes on and on and on. And there's a lot of counties and there's a lot of organizations out there that are partnering to try to address the cause that's driving violent crime. Gun violence disproportionately affects and impacts communities of color. It's highly concentrated in areas that, and for numbers of people living in areas that are underserved. Some of the states, and they've been mentioned tonight, that have the least, have the most friendly gun control policies have some of the highest levels of gun violence. I'll use Maryland is just one example. And it's not because all of Maryland has a lot of gun violence, it's because there's an enormous amount of gun violence in Baltimore. And there's thought leaders out there that are actively working on strategies to try to successfully engage with those individuals that are at the highest risk of violent behavior. Evidence-based community violence interventions are showing that we can significantly reduce gun violence in the most impacted communities. Community violence programs in Chicago, New York, Philadelphia have reduced gun violence. But the same efforts that are put in place in Baltimore have failed miserably. One size doesn't fit all. And to be here and to want to participate in this particular bill has a great provision, and I think if it would have been held on its own, there would have been, I think every member of this body would have voted for it. We're not going to solve these things if we continue to treat the tool as the perpetrator and pretend that that's going to solve the problem. There's other street outreach programs in other cities, Advanced Peace used in California, that are supporting those high-risk individuals that are focusing on personal development, attainment of life goals, without the use of violence, that are proving to be far more successful than just model pieces of legislation so that we can pretend that we're doing something important. Members, we've heard a lot from this side of the aisle tonight about our constitutional rights, how healthy gun owners take care of their guns, teach their children, teach their friends. And that's not the issue. The issue tonight is that by restricting the rights of law-abiding citizens is not going to change the hearts of the people that want to commit crimes against themselves or others. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Some time ago, shortly after the tragedy that happened in Burnsville, I brought a motion to the floor to increase the penalty for straw purchasers, and we're all aware of that. And Representative Novotny gave us a little bit of a history lesson, and that it was a darn near unanimous vote that put it on the public safety bill last year, and then it was dropped on the cutting room floor. And I brought up the day that we brought this up for an urgency, my bill, House File 549, very early bill introduction, because as was stated then, and I'll state it again, in 2019, I introduced the bill, House File 2423. In the 21-22 biennium, I introduced it again, House File 346, very early bill introduction. And then last year, House File 548, another early bill introduction. Asked for hearings on all of them, every single year, asked for a hearing. Never, crickets, never heard back from any of the chair on the bill. Was told when I brought it to the floor as an amendment by, I believe it was Representative Pinto, it's not workable, it's not workable, we gotta vote against it, gotta vote against it. And so I thought, surely after when it was discovered how the murderer got the firearms that he used to kill 3 Burnsville first responders, I thought, surely after that, people will see the reasoning behind wanting to change this and make the penalty stronger so it actually gets charged out. And as Representative Niska said that day, so Andy Ruger doesn't have to write in with federal charges. But again, sadly, would Representative Berg yield to a question?
She will. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've just got to know why, when we declared an urgency for 3 officers that were brutally killed in your community, why on that day could we not have passed the bill?
Representative Berg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm not the chair of the Public Safety Committee, so I'm not sure I can answer your question. Thank you.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, Representative Berg, you could have stood up on the floor and defended your community and said, we need to do
Point
this.
of order, Madam Speaker.
Representative Long.
Masons 124, paragraph 1, in debate, a member must confine remarks to the question before the House and avoid personalities.
Representative Scott, could you please resume without referencing personalities? Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of why we're here today after really what amounts to 6 years of trying to get this law passed. And then you have to attach something that you know members on this side of the aisle find offensive by blaming an inanimate object instead of the murderer. Some in this body, when there are officer-involved shootings, want to blame an officer and not the criminal. Some in our body have been known to do that. I'm just so sorry to those officers' families that we weren't able to pass this bill almost 6 years ago when it was introduced. Maybe the straw purchaser would have known she could be charged with a felony, and those officers might be alive. And folks, it's not just officers that have been victims of these straw purchases. It's been your average, everyday, run-of-the-mill Minnesotan, too. They've lost their lives or been injured by folks that have obtained firearms through straw purchasers when they were themselves not allowed to possess a firearm because they were felons. I'm glad that this is being taken up today, but I'm just really, really sad that it couldn't have been taken up and passed 6 years ago or even last year instead of hitting the cutting room floor.
Representative Long.
Madam Speaker, I move that the House be allowed to meet past midnight.
Representative Demuth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Majority Leader Long. I would agree with that motion.
All those in favor of the motion to meet past midnight, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The House is permitted to meet past midnight. The member from Dakota, Representative Whitty.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you all that supported law enforcement today. Representative Hewitt, Representative Backer, I know I give you guys a hard time, but you guys know as EMTs we're in this together. Representative Grasso, Representative Johnson, Representative Novotny, thank you. Last year on the House, our resolution since December 3rd, 1874, when the first Minnesota peace officer was reported killed in the line of duty, it was 276 that have made the ultimate sacrifice and given their lives in the line of duty. We did lose 2 this year. Our law enforcement are hurting physically, emotionally, and mentally. And I can tell you, at my Burnsville family, they're still down 14 officers that haven't come by. They lost 2 that day, but 14 are working through the process, and we will never know. My hand is always extended. I'm willing to reach across just like I did on the SRO. My hope is we can start being a beacon of hope and be a shining light for our law enforcement and be, like I said, for my law enforcement initiative 365. Let's be there, not so much in words, but in our actions. And thank you, Representative Mueller, for your comments. Thank you.
The member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This is a pretty disappointing situation. It's really unfortunate, Representative Novotny, that your amendment wasn't put on, and instead we're in this situation where, like Representative Scott said, we should have done this 6 years ago or 5 years ago, or certainly several weeks ago when we had the opportunity to do it. And the only reason we didn't, the only reason we're here where we are today, is politics. It's political games. Sections 1 and 3 of this bill would have been unanimously supported. Almost, I'm sure we would have had all green aboard for sections 1 and 3. Frankly, like Representative Scott said, we should have passed section 3 of this bill years ago. But instead, it's all being tied together with this binary trigger ban that's frankly just not ready for prime time. It's not. It's not clearly statutorily written. It's going to have a lot of problems when it comes to figuring out what it means. Does it apply to Glocks? I think we're going to have to pass the bill to find out what's in it as it relates to that. But the other problem with this is it very clearly creates a takings problem for the state of Minnesota, because there are a lot of people, whether it does apply to Glocks or whether it just applies to products that are out there known as binary triggers that people have bought legally. The state of Minnesota is now going to tell all those people that they can't have that anymore, that item of value that they purchased for their firearm is now illegal. And they're going to have a takings claim against the state of Minnesota. They're going to win those claims against the state of Minnesota. And we don't know how much that's going to cost the state of Minnesota, because it's not ready for prime time. So instead of having something that we could all come together on, the majority has chosen to stick into that a poison pill that just isn't ready for prime time and isn't going to be able to get support across the aisle. And it's on purpose. It's just meant to take an issue that we should have solved a long time ago, that we should be able to come together on, and make it into a partisan vote. That's what's happening tonight. Vote no.
The member from Dakota, Representative Ryer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to start by just saying their names. Officer Paul Elstrand, Officer Matthew Ruge, firefighter paramedic Adam Finseth. We're here because of their sacrifice and their dedication to our community, the community of Burnsville. I represent the area in which they were murdered in defense of 7 children. And I also want to thank Representative Berg for bringing forward this bill. Representative Scott, I appreciate your efforts over the years on the straw purchases. At the same time, when we have binary triggers on weapons, we have a device that is intentionally being accentuated for destruction. And I see no reason why anyone on either side of the aisle would see that that was a useful and valuable thing. I don't see, and I have not heard why it is an essential threat to the Second Amendment as I'm hearing it tonight. To me, I feel like we should all be able to be united in wanting weapons that do the basic things that you need them to do. I don't know why you need them to do those things. I'm disappointed that you do, and I am really looking forward to passing this law. Thank you.
The member from Anoka, Representative Engen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to unpack this a little bit, and I'm going to be extremely brief. Representative Novotny, he said it perfectly earlier, that this is what's wrong with politics. February 18th, tragedy occurs in Burnsville. The community of Burnsville comes together. The law enforcement and first responder community came together. And even for a brief moment, we came together. We hugged each other at that funeral. We saw the humanity that was lost that day. But it didn't last long, because when a solution was brought forward that we all agreed on, the majority saw an opportunity to claim ownership of it and then to attach something to it that's completely political, and they know it. That's disgusting. And it's what's wrong with politics, and it's why people don't trust us. It's why people don't trust politicians or government in general. Because you play games with something as important and as vital as this. It's sad. It needs to change. We need to be better. Thank you to all the first responders in this room. Thank you to the people who actually know what it's like to put on a bulletproof vest to go to work. I don't know what that feels like. Maybe we should listen to them. Set aside the politics and listen to the experts. This stuff's sad.
The member from Sherburne, Representative Novotny.
Madam Speaker, the problem that we have with the trigger language is that there's been a phrase that's been used multiple times, binary trigger, and that's not in the bill. There's a description of a function of a trigger, and this is why I'm against it, because it's a very vague description, like everything else we've had. Now, the first time this came to public safety, they brought in the forensic expert from the BCA. And unprepared, I asked her to explain what the language meant. And she said that a binary trigger can fire more than one round without a pull of the trigger and a release. And when I asked her to specify what release meant, is the finger coming off the trigger. And I tried to explain then, and I've explained several times since, that most modern firearms, your finger does not have to come off the trigger fully. There is a safety on the trigger, and the sear can reset before you fully come off it. And just like the bill that we just listened to, we were told it was our job to fix it. And I specifically didn't try to fix it because I didn't want the inanimate object to be blamed for this murder of 3 public safety officers. And I was right. That's where it went. And I pointed this out. They were murdered by a person who made a decision. But we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about something else. And we can deflect and try to defer and pay attention to the shiny object, not pay attention to the reality. The reality is we have a problem with violence in this state and in this country, and that's what we need to work on. We can look at the switch problem as just an example of whatever law you make about an inanimate object, that's not going to change it. We need to change people's behavior. We need to change people's respect for life and other human beings. Whatever language you come up with, whatever fix that doesn't address the issue is just going to be side dressing until we start dealing with the value of human life as we treat other people. That's why I didn't want to fix this. I wanted to focus on the behavior and the bad guy, not something else that makes it easier to blame. I didn't want a diversion. And I didn't want to make half the active Glocks or half the active firearms used by law enforcement and people that are sporting and that are concealed carrying right now to be considered as having a machine gun. That's the second part of it. I can fire more than one round without fully releasing the trigger. We haven't fixed that language. I don't know how we do it. Nobody obviously can come up with a good answer, or it would have been there. Does the language describe a binary trigger? Yes, but it also describes a lot else. And I know that it's legislative intent that we might get out to, years or months after the arrest or the court case. Why don't we get the language right? If you really want that, if you really think that'll make a difference, can you at least do it so that you don't outlaw every Glock, every modern sporting rifle? Can you just do it right? Thank you.
The member from Dakota, Representative Berg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members, for this discussion. I couldn't agree with you more. Pretty much all of you. We do have a problem with mental health in this country, and it is what is behind some of these violent crimes and tragedies in our communities. So we're addressing that. We put more support personnel in every public school in this state to reach our children, to help our staff and our teachers. We've created economic opportunity for workers. We've protected them. We've protected their right to earn a living with prevailing wage. We are trying to make sure that we have access to affordable health care for everyone.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
We are trying to make sure that there is
Representative Schultz, for what purpose do you rise?
Yeah, point of order under Mason Section 101, sticking to the order of debate.
Representative Berg.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. I will stick to the order of the mental health, which Representative Novotny so rightly brought up. So we know if people have stable housing, if they have food security, if they have strong schools, if they have paid time off to care for themselves and their family members, if they have time where they can make sure that they can get themselves to safety. We're addressing some of the issues. So I hear you, and I agree with you, and we do want to get it right. The BCA letter that you all have, the experts have said that the language that includes the binary trigger does not include Glocks or long guns. According to the BCA, Superintendent Drew, this won't affect Glocks because Glock pistols, when you release the trigger, it resets but you still need to depress it again to fire the next round. And to talk about the guns being an inanimate object, but they're in the hands of people that are clearly in crisis themselves. This is true. But let's say the gentleman, or actually not gentleman, that was in crisis that day and what happened in my community. If he was throwing knives at the officers from the window, if he was throwing apples, if he was throwing dog bones, like, yes, inanimate objects, but it wasn't knives, apples, dog bones. It was a rate of fire that the officers could mount no response to. You don't get that with an apple. You don't get it with a knife. You get it with a gun with a binary trigger. So yes, we need to address the mental health aspects behind this. But what we are doing is we are taking things off the shelves that people that are in crisis have access to. And that is what happened in my community and other communities, access to inanimate objects, as you call them. Gun violence prevention requires a multifaceted response, and this bill does that. It closed loopholes in current law to hold offenders accountable. It's one more step that we can take to keep our communities, families, law enforcement, and first responders safe from gun violence. When we know better, we do better. We learn, we evolve. That is our responsibility. And we do this to keep our communities safe. So thank you so much, Representative Scott, for the work that you have done that has gotten us step by step to this point. I appreciate that. Thank you, Representative Novotny, for your wisdom and for caring so much. And thank you, Representative Whitty, for joining in our community, our shared community. I was at that vigil. I was at the subsequent events that we had after that, because we love and we care for our first responders. Thank you to everyone on that side of the aisle that I saw at the memorial service. And you're right, Representative Engen, for just a moment, it was there. It was there. I thank you, I'm not breaking that. But I am thanking everybody in this chamber that supported us and that loved our community. Vote green.
The member from Stearns, the Minority Leader, Representative Damuth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Whitty, I want to thank you for bringing forward the amendment that we had a good vote on that. It could have been much better, but we had a fairly good vote on the Whitty amendment, and the state appreciates that. I do struggle with the theater in this room when there are votes on amendments, knowing full well that you're going to take them back down. And I will not arraign motives on why I think that happens, but I'm sure everyone in this chamber knows exactly why that happens. And it is frustrating and very disingenuous. Representative Novotny, thank you for bringing your amendment forward. And the restraint that you showed as you tried to bring reason and common sense is admirable. And I wished it could have been a little bit more intense, but this was not the right place. But thank you. And then to Representative Scott, you have fought for over half a decade to increase the penalties for straw buyers. And we finally got that done last year with an almost green board, except for 2 people in this chamber, the same makeup of this body. So we knew it could be done. So thank you for fighting for that, Representative Scott. But unfortunately, in the conference committee, a complete Democrat majority, but a complete Democrat conference committee last year, that provision was stripped back out. The bill wasn't dead. We wanted to make sure that it would come forward. With the absolute tragedy that happened in Burnsville, and to the greater law enforcement community, first responder community, it was the right time to bring that back declare the urgency after those tragic events, and give the majority one more time to do the right thing. And that is not what happened in this chamber. And it was disappointing. But the more shocking thing to me was when this bill that is up before you right now was heard in the Public Safety Committee. I happened to be there for a different bill, but I sat and listened to the hearing on this. And I was quite shocked by the fact that when a question was posed from a committee member to the bill author, did you work with Representative Scott? Now, obviously, we had tried to declare an urgency. So it wasn't a secret that Representative Scott had been working on a bill. But the bill author said, no, I did not. But not only did the bill author say, no, I did not, but creatively took that language, put it into another bill, and added a poison pill to it. You could easily have that secondary, the binary trigger language, as a standalone. You could have passed the Scott language by declaring that urgency. We could have passed it off this House floor. You could have taken the language that you now have in here, Representative Berg. You could have taken that language, the binary trigger language, and had that as a standalone, and you could have passed that off this House floor tonight, but you did not. And then to hear out of the tragedy in Burnsville that the evil person that caused those deaths, the murderer in that case, could have thrown knives, apples, or dog bones? Are you kidding me? That is so disrespectful. Absolutely disrespectful. And I'm incredibly disappointed. Members, I would encourage a no vote on this. And to clarify one other thing that we heard earlier, that the Minnesota Sheriff's Association supports the straw purchase language. They support this bill. What I'll tell you, let me clarify this before you take your vote on this. The Minnesota Sheriff's Association does support the straw purchase provisions of the bill and has heard no opposition to the VCET reporting. But the Minnesota Sheriff's Association, they state that the definition of the binary trigger language needs to be resolved. And let me get you one more point of clarification. MPPOA, Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association, supports the straw purchase language if it were a standalone bill. However, the binary trigger language needs some additional vetting to avoid issues with interpretation. What are you passing in this place? We heard that 10 other states have the binary trigger language. Guess what? 40 don't. Do it right. Vote no. Do this as a standalone. Do the right thing for Minnesota. Do the right thing for your community, and then move forward. Vote no on this bill.
The member from Hennepin, Majority Leader, Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, when is enough enough? We heard tonight that we are blaming inanimate objects. Yes, evil people kill people, but guess what? They can kill a lot more people with a gun than they can with another inanimate object. They can kill more people with an AR-15 than they can with a handgun, and they can kill even more people with a binary trigger. There is no civilian use for binary trigger. Its entire purpose is to turn guns into fully automatic weapons. It doubles the rate of fire. That hinders a first responder's ability to react, and yes, it is more deadly. That is the whole point. 10 states, as were noted, already banned binary triggers, and after an ambush that killed a Fargo police officer, the Republican Attorney General of North Dakota called binary triggers purposeless. And he was right. Just to correct the record on the Sheriff's Association, the
Point of order, Madam
Sheriff's
Speaker.
Association.
Representative Schultz, for what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm rising to Mason Section 112.7. Members do not have the right to read their own written speeches without the permission of the body.
Representative Long, you have the floor.
Thank you. The Minnesota Sheriff's Association opposes the use or possession of binary triggers. These devices are meant to harm more people more quickly and should not be permitted in the state of Minnesota. Let me also be clear, the language is clear in the bill that Glocks are not banned. The BCA said so in a letter to the committee very explicitly. This bill also works to prevent straw purchases of firearms. We raise the penalty to a felony level, which will make it easier to prosecute, and we add a reasonably should know standard to make it easier to prosecute as well. That was not in Representative Scott's bill. Also, unlike Representative Scott's bill, it extends the prohibition on straw purchasing to all firearms, not just handguns and semi-automatic weapons.
Point of order, Madam
This
Speaker.
was
Representative New Brindley, state your point of order.
Mason, section 112, paragraph 6. A member has no right to read or have the clerk read from any paper or book or use any electronic recording as part of a speech without permission of the body.
Representative New Brindley, we do not follow that portion of Mason's. People read sections of their speech all the time. Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will repeat my statement just so in case people missed it. Unlike Representative Scott's bill, it extends the prohibition on straw purchasing to all firearms and not just handguns and semi-automatic weapons. This was not playing politics. This was getting the policy right. And I want to thank Chair Moeller and Representative Berg for their work on doing the work in committee to get the policy right so that we could bring the bill before us here today. Both of these provisions in this bill can help save lives in our state, and I urge a green vote.
The clerk will take the roll on the bill. Will the clerk please call the names of the members voting remotely?
Carroll.
Carroll, aye.
Carroll, aye. Howard.
Howard, aye.
Howard, aye. Keel.
Keel, no.
Keel, no. Cagle.
Cagle, no.
Cagle, aye. Tabke.
Tabke, aye.
Excuse me. Aye. No. Cagle.
Hang on, Brad.
Tabke.
Tabke, aye.
Tabke, aye.
All right, go ahead.
Cagle.
Cagle, aye.
Cagle, aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 71 ayes and 59 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to.